Korea and Japan as well, Italy of course, the wide range of people who have made it here for this huge moment in history. 1.4 billion Catholics around the world, many I'm sure watching the television, and tens of thousands of people here, must be heading beyond 50, 60,000 at least, also here waiting for the news of who their new leader will be. Well, joining me here from our broadcast position high above St. Peter's Square is the writer, journalist, broadcaster and biographer of Pope Francis. Austin, it's good to see you. Very, very good to see you, because this is a moment in history that you've been through before. I've never been through it. This is incredible.
This is my third conclave, and what's so wonderful to see is it's the same as the last two. In other words, it's in the afternoon of the second day that we get the new Pope, which shows that there's a dynamic there. And it's good news, because as Aline was saying, there was a lot of talk of them needing more time to get to know each other, and uncertainty and fragmentation. What this means is that they have pretty quickly come around a single person who just had the momentum. That's really what day two is about, is discovering who has the momentum. They see that as a sign of the Holy Spirit, where there's that momentum. And really the lunch would have been an important time for the last doubters to come in behind. And here we have it. Yeah. We have the new Pope.
Yeah. What do you think Pope Francis is thinking, looking down on all of this? I noticed actually that the clouds opened up and the sun streamed right through on this particular moment. What do you think the Church is thinking about this?
And Clive, if you're talking about touching symbols, you notice that it wasn't just a seagull that appeared suddenly before the smoke, but a little seagull chick as well, a seagull family. Very appropriate for a Pope who, of course, put the care for the common home, ecology, at the centre of his concern. Look, Pope Francis wanted a conclave that started from the needs of the world. That's why you were talking about the variety of cardinals from so many different parts of the world, even from parts of the world where there are actually very few Catholics. He wanted the reality of the periphery to be brought into the room when they were making the decision. And so I think he would have been delighted that they've had that chance to do that deliberation over the last 10 days, and that has led to them being able to focus pretty quickly and come round a single figure.
Interesting, because of course 80% of the cardinal electors were actually chosen by Francis. Does that suggest to you, particularly with the speed of this decision, that we are seeing a continuation of his legacy and the way that he approached the papacy?
I think whoever comes out on the balcony will be a fruit of the Pope Francis years. There's no question that Pope Francis opened up a new era in the Church, and this Pope now, whoever he is, will be building on that legacy. That said, it's been pretty obvious over the last 10 days that there have been important tensions and differences over, we've talked about those who want to accelerate, those who want to put the brakes on. There has been obviously discussion. And one of the big questions, I think, for the cardinals has been, Francis was the first Pope outside Europe. This is now a global, multipolar church. And it's very important, they said, that whoever is the next Pope has that same universal vision. Might not be somebody from outside Europe, but I think there's a strong chance that he will be. But whoever he is, he's going to have that sense of the church as no longer a European church with a mission, but a global church, and how to carry together this complex global body with all its differences, how to hold it together through one of Francis's great legacies, which was synodality, which was the practice, if you like, of coming together, assembling, dialoguing and discerning together.
We're looking at some of the pictures now of the streets leading into the square. They're lined with people here. Everyone wanting to be part of this incredible moment here at the Vatican. Let's talk about some of the challenges that I'm sure the cardinal electors obviously would have gone through, and whether or not the man they've put forward, who's managed to get the 2/3 majority, is going to be able to meet those challenges. What do you think they are now as we move forward from this moment?
There are many things in the next Pope's inbox, and that inbox would have been piling up this last 10 days. There's the Vatican finances.
I should just say, sorry, Austin, just to cut in there, we're looking at pictures there of the balcony. It's red velvet curtains there, parted, and it will be from that balcony that we will hear the first words from the new Pope. We're not sure when, as we were saying earlier with Aline McBool, that it was, what, 66 minutes, over an hour?
It was over an hour, and I'll tell you what happened in 2013 and why it took so long, was that Pope Francis, having been elected, having accepted the election, having chosen his name, and having vested in the famous white papal garment, and having been greeted by all the cardinals who promised his fidelity, then on his way to the balcony decided to stop in the Pauline Chapel, which we saw yesterday before they went into the Sistine. They started at the Pauline Chapel. There he stayed for 20 minutes, and people who saw him go in describe a man with the weight of what had just happened to him on his shoulders, but he came out with this very different expression. And Pope Francis always said that time in the chapel left him with a sense of light and peace that never left him. And I think it's very likely that the new Pope will do the same, just to, not to come straight out, but just to pause for a moment, to take some time, you know, because it is one heck of a responsibility that has been laid upon his shoulders. And one of the things that really strikes me about any new Pope, in a sense, the rest of his life is not his own. Francis never went back to Argentina. You know, he stayed here for the rest of his life. And that new Pope must be thinking exactly the same at this moment.
Indeed, because obviously there were leading candidates that we all talked about, the Secretary of State and the Cardinal from Manila and so on. We talked about them. But the old adage is, you go in thinking you're going to be Pope, you often leave as a cardinal.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if it's that moment, even though you may have in your heart told yourself you want this job, you want it more than anything, you have the right vision, the right ideas, the right expertise to lead this global communion, whether once that is put upon your shoulders, it could be too much to bear.
Clive, it's not really that anybody goes into a conclave thinking, I've got the vision, I think I can be Pope. Nobody kind of wants to be Pope. It's more like this. It's a mission that you are given, and your fellow cardinals believe that you can do it. You believe that God will give you the help to do it, and that you accept it as a mission. Remember that these are men who have given their lives to service, to mission.
Church,
I mean, as cardinals, as bishops, as priests even. This is, if you like, the final mission, the greatest mission that any of them will be given. And that's how they see it, as a heavy responsibility, yes, but ultimately a mission. And they believe, and John Paul II said this in his regulations, you know, you should accept, because you will be given the help you need to carry out that mission. It doesn't just depend on you.
You should accept it. Indeed. All right, we're going to go down to the crowds now, and our correspondent Sarah Rainsford is there with some of those people who've been waiting out in the sun, Sarah, all day for this moment.
Yeah, such excitement here, Clive, such a party atmosphere. It's really bizarre, you know, this crowd, they've been waiting for that smoke. They were all, though, taken by surprise. It was a real shock when it actually happened. I just sat down for a moment because we were convinced it wasn't going to happen. And then we heard, actually, a massive roar from the crowd, people leaping up and down, people cheering, people clapping. Such real, genuine excitement, a real outpouring, really, of joy, frankly. It was a moment that people have been waiting for. They didn't know when it was coming. They still don't know, of course, who actually has been elected. But there are so many people here in the street, and they've come from all over the world representing that global church. We were speaking to people from Mexico, a mum and her son who had come specially all the way from Mexico to be here for this moment, and they told us they were determined to wait until the smoke, the white smoke, finally came. And in the end, actually, it wasn't that long a wait. You know, one day and a vote yesterday as well. We spoke to people from the West Midlands in the UK, other British Catholics who'd come here too. Just this real sense of purpose, of joy, of a momentous historic occasion, and applause when this next phase, I guess, of the election, this extraordinary, this unique election, has just kicked off, and that is the band now on the steps playing for the election of a new pope. Everyone has been watching the chimney for so long, but now their attention obviously has shifted towards the balcony, where they're hoping and expecting to see very soon their next pope.
Indeed, you mentioned there, Sarah, all those people from all over the world who have managed to get here for this moment. But this is also a huge moment for the city of Rome, of course, because, of course, the Pope becomes the Bishop of Rome.
That's quite right. It's a huge moment for Rome, it's a huge moment for Italy, it is a huge moment for Catholics, it's a huge moment for the world, and that is why there are so many people here. I mean, just at the moment, to give you an understanding,
Argentina flags.
All right, we seem to lose the line there to Sarah. Apologies for that. Ali Maqbool, our religion editor, waiting with us here. Just take us through what we're seeing now.
Well, they certainly know how to do drama, don't they? We're all tuned in from around the world, not with a name immediately. They know to put out the white smoke, the bells ring, everyone pours into the square. They've got the marching bands ready. They're pouring into the side of the square. We're all glued to that balcony and having the name of the cardinal announced. Of course, at that moment, we'll get some sense, through knowing their background, hopefully, about where they might take the papacy. And remember, we're not just talking about a leader of the Catholic Church, we're talking about a major global voice that has been selected here. Certainly a religious leader, but a global leader as well. So we'll hear first about who it is, which cardinal it is, but then also the name that they've chosen, and that in itself is also, their papal name is also an indication of the kind of person they admire, the saints or previous popes they admire, and that will also give us a sense of which direction they might take. But then, of course, we'll have the candidate themselves, the new pope themselves appear on the balcony. They'll say a few words to the crowd here in their Urbi et Orbi speech, the city and the world, and they'll bless the crowds as well. And we'll get a clear indication of where things go. But the drama of this moment is extraordinary. And the fact that it has come at this point after the fourth vote, when, as I say, 2005, one of the favourites won it, but it took longer, is what caught a lot of people off guard. We hear that 15,000 were in the square at the moment the white smoke came out, and they will treasure that moment, clearly. There were 45,000 in the square last night, just for that first communication from the cardinals inside, great excitement, and I think perhaps people had expected that later on or tomorrow might be the time we'd hear, but how lucky those 15,000 would be feeling now that they were there for that moment of extraordinary, as I say, drama.
Indeed, Austin Ivory. They are servants of the Lord, they are servants of the Church, and Francis, in choosing that papal name, really wanted to drive that message home. And one wonders how important it is to have a church leader now, in the current age in which we live, where we see nationalism rising, where we see in the minds of many a lack of empathy for those who don't have as much as others. How important is it that that message of helping and trying to be a voice for those who are disadvantaged, how important is that now?
It's absolutely key. They were aware going into this conclave, I mean, even as Francis was in hospital, the world order was breaking up that they had grown up with. We now live in a world where it isn't clear where the order is. A world, if you like, of strongmen and empires and so on. And they were asking themselves, what is the Church's role in this? How do we speak for all those smaller countries which, because they're not at the table, are on the menu? How is the Pope able to be not just an advocate for them, but also to facilitate processes of encounter and dialogue which enable, in this time of, as you're saying, national egotism, to come together to cooperate and collaborate on issues which are far beyond any nation or any region to deal with on their own, whether it's migration or climate change or indeed war. All these issues require collaboration. And the Church has, the wonderful thing about this place is it has a kind of a global view, if you like, a kind of God's eye view of the whole human family. And so to some extent the Pope will be looking right now at the whole world and asking, how can I assist this family to thrive in these circumstances?
And did that underpin then Pope Francis's desire to bring in Myanmar, to bring in Papua New Guinea, to bring in all these places around the world where there frankly aren't many Catholics?
He wanted by doing that, to bring the voice of the poor, those on the periphery, into the heart of the church. He also wanted the periphery to challenge the centre, which is kind of what Jesus did too. This place, Rome, Europe, needs to be challenged now by the realities of the developing world, by the realities of poverty. It needs to be, to some extent, shaken out of its complacency. This is how Francis saw it. He declared war from the very beginning on a culture of entitlement, of clericalism. He wanted a church that literally washed the feet, as he did every Thursday, of prisoners of the poor. And I think he will be seeing now, I mean, he will be, he wanted a conclave which would produce the Pope that could be a true servant, as it were, of humanity at this time.
Yeah. Very, very interesting now, because we're all still waiting here at the Vatican, St. Peter's Square, for the name of the man who will now lead the Roman Catholic Church after his election and victory in a with two-thirds majority of the cardinal electors. And the band here striking up quite a tune that the audience absolutely is adoring right here beneath bright sunshine in the center of Rome. Let's listen in. Travelled with Pope Francis, of course, on many of his trips. And Austin, you've written a biography on him. I wonder what is at the top, Ali, top of the new Pope's intro.
Well, as they were reminded as they went into the Sistine Chapel to vote, one of the last voices they heard, one of the last messages they heard was during a Mass, a homily in a Mass, by Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, who's too old to vote now, but he said to them he was praying for somebody that the church and humanity needed at this time. That's a big intro when you're looking at dealing with the issues of the church and with humanity. Look, there are big issues to deal with within the church. Yes, there's aspects of the Pope Francis legacy about reaching out and as to how that continues. But of course, the scourges of sex abuse, clerical sex abuse, the issues about financial irregularities in the church, and the role of women has become a very big issue. Part of what Pope Francis did was try to find out what rank and file Catholics, if you like, cared about, and it came out high on the list of issues that people cared about, a greater role for women in the church. So that's within the church. Well, outside the church, you look around the world and there is a lot to deal with. And Pope Francis did become a very powerful voice against war. He talked about war in itself being a failure. He was a global voice really for the marginalized in all kinds of ways. When you're talking about the dignity of migrants, that was a cause that he really took up, the poor, and for climate change as well. So that's a lot of huge things in the intro, both inside the institution and outside.
Austin?
Just looking down there, seeing the retired cardinals, the ones who couldn't vote. They're all down there. You see them with the red zucchero. I just spotted Cardinal O'Malley, the retired Archbishop of Boston, for example. There are various others there. Of course, they prepared them for this. They were part of those meetings over the last 15 days. They, of course, had to stay outside. They couldn't go into the Sistine. They weren't electors. But they will be, of course, and they won't know, just like us, they don't know who it will be. And I wonder what they're feeling at this moment.
I'm actually also wondering what you think might be going through the mind of the person who's been chosen now. You wrote a biography of Pope Francis, and we know the emotions that were boiling inside of him at this particular time. What do you think is going through the mind of the new man?
Well, he always described this sense of peace. It was about lunchtime when people were coming up to him and saying, get ready, you know, some of them asking about his health. He knew that it was serious. He knew he was likely to be elected that afternoon. And he just said he just felt a peace about it. It would be okay. And that peace is really what never left him. And that's really what I think one hopes, that new Pope who's been selected, he's accepted now. He's chosen his name. He's had time to think about his name. He's had probably, you know, at least a couple of hours if he hadn't thought about it before. He'll be talking with his fellow cardinals. I think he'll be thinking about his first words on the balcony, because those first words, and indeed those first gestures, are really set the programme of the pontificate. Everybody remembers Francis bowing his head to ask for the blessing of the people. Wonderful this, you know, Francis was all about taking the church out to the people. And I wonder what the next Pope, thinking of that, what happened, that precedent, will be thinking about what gesture he wants now to give, and what words, of course, to begin with. It may or may not be a fluent Italian speaker. I remember John Paul II on the balcony, his Italian at that stage wasn't brilliant, and he made a few mistakes in his first sentences, and he said, I'm not from Italy. I know you will correct me when I get things wrong. Just that humility.
And that
people
would
love
have
that.
Oh,
the
everybody.
Romans love that. Romans love that. Absolutely.
Well, we're all now waiting for that famous balcony with the doors to open and the first words from the new Pope, the leader of 1.4 billion Catholics around the world. What a moment that will be. We just don't know who that person is yet. That's the balcony there. And we're all wondering just what lies ahead for the Roman Catholic communion. Ali Makboul, one wonders also where the first visit might be of the new Pope.
Yes.
And what tone that might set in terms of their ideas moving forward.
Well, quite. And Pope Francis made that very clear. His first visit outside Rome was to the island of Lampedusa, which is where a lot of migrants head to as well. He laid a wreath on the waters there for all of those who had lost their lives in perilous crossings as migrants. That clearly set the tone. But, you know, we've now had exactly half an hour since the white smoke emerged. We know it was 6:08 p.m. here, 5:08 p.m. back in the UK. And it's going to still be another half an hour or so before that person emerges. And the thinking is, if it was somebody who emerged, perhaps in the first full day of voting, it might be one of the candidates we thought of as favourites going in, the ones around whom people might coalesce immediately. Someone like Pietro Parolin, who was the Secretary of State for Pope Francis, and actually in the end obviously bought into a lot of the causes that Pope Francis championed around the world. He was his emissary, going to countries around the world, meeting world leaders. There are some who say he made some mistakes in that mission, Pietro Parolin, and Pope Francis indeed himself in his dealings with China, in his dealings with Russia as well. But we'll get to find out fairly soon. We're still speculating until we hear the name that is announced to the crowds in, we expect, the next half an hour or so. But we'll find out pretty quickly what kind of agenda we expect from them and where their first visit might be. But as I say, Pope Francis set the tone very quickly indeed about where his focus was going to be.
Yeah, Austin Ivory is actually the proto-deacon of the College of Cardinals, who is the first on that balcony ahead of the new Pope.
That's right. Cardinal Mamberti, who's French, and he will, of course, say the famous words, Annuncio vobis, Annuncio vobis. I can't quite get it right. Anyway,
it's in Latin.
I announced to you news of great joy. If somebody's just gone for my head,
yeah.
And then he will say Habemus Papam, the famous words, and then he will say the name in Latin, and then he will follow that by who has taken the name, and he will say the name of the Pope also in Latin.
Right.
So these are those iconic first words. I announce to you news of great joy is, of course, the words of the Annunciation when the angel Gabriel appears to Mary. It's exactly the same words. So the assumption is that the election of a pope is good news for the world.
Yes.
This is part of the way, as it were, God helps us to flourish in this life. This is a help to humanity. And I think, the issue really for me in this conclave has not been where we talk about left and right and liberals and conservatives. It's actually been about how the church relates to the world. In a way, it's the old question of the Second Vatican Council. Does the church, as it were, take refuge in its own institution and wait for people to come to it and preach, as it were, from a place of privilege and power? Or, as Francis believed, is this a church that starts from below, from a place of humility, and goes out to people? To take the church to the people was always his vision. The reason that Francis startled us in 2013 was that almost everything about him communicated this new style.
Yeah.
The approachability, the directness, the
Press
warmth, the
conferences on
humanity,
planes and so on.
the freewheeling nature of his relationship with the press. It's very hard now to imagine the next pope reversing that, but it is possible. And therefore, I think who comes out on that balcony, I certainly, in a way, I think our first reactions are going to be, is he going to continue to be that sort of pope? Or is this actually a course correction, an attempt to some extent recover what Francis broke through?
But you know this as well as anyone, I suspect, that Francis had charisma. He could pull that off. He could have that impromptu press conference on an aeroplane and talk about the relationship of the church to the LGBTQ community.
Clive, here's the secret I'm going to let you into. In 2012, Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio's reputation was of a rather dour man and an introvert. After he was elected, the one thing that the Argentine bishops used to say to him is, Jorge, what the heck happened to you? And he would say, it's the grace of the office. He gave almost no interviews.
Yeah.
And this is what we have to remember. The person that's been elected might be actually a fairly introverted, shy person. But as Pope, he will need to be different. Because nowadays a Pope has to be able to relate to crowds, travel the world, and have that charism. But charism means gift.
Yes.
And as I said earlier, the assumption is that, as it were, God, the Holy Spirit, will give the Pope the gifts that he needs, building on his own natural gifts, to perform the mission of St. Peter that Jesus entrusted to St. Peter. So, we will probably see, whoever comes out on that balcony, we will probably make an instant judgment to say he's got a reputation for this, that and the other, he's a bit this, he's a bit that, and then watch while he then surprises us.
The office transforms the individual. The office changes them.
Exactly right. And it did Francis. And he was very straight about it. He said, it's the grace of the office. He would laugh about it. But, I mean, the idea that he would become this, as you say, freewheeling, funny, spontaneous, direct. I mean, he was always focused, energetic. He was always missionary. But in a way, the charism of Francis was very much a gift.
Yeah. I mean, Aleem, looking at, we've talked a little bit about the intre, we've talked about how perhaps the new pontiff will try to continue the legacy of Francis. The fact is, we are living in a much more secular age. How does the new leader of the Roman Catholic Church handle that particular situation?
Well, Pope Francis was one of those who wanted to reach out to people on the peripheries of the faith, but also beyond it as well. It was a hugely consequential 12 years or so of his papacy. Certainly, there will be those who think, because of the impact he's had over the last 12 years in this way of reaching out, he was, for some people, even outside the faith, a bit of a rock star because of the causes he chose to champion, the environment and poverty and being anti-war. But there were those, his fiercest critics were within the faith, very close to him in some cases. He had open spats with some of the cardinals who actually didn't really like what they saw as a bit of cult of personality. So I think a lot of people are looking at this as a bit of a referendum on the last 12 years. He had a vision on how to reach out to a world that wasn't necessarily, particularly in Europe, one that was as religious as it has been in the past. He had his ideas of doing that. This, and who ends up stepping out on that balcony, is going to be something of a referendum on whether the cardinals felt he was successful in doing that or not.
Yes, I mean, Austin, there were those suggestions, weren't there, that there were splits, that there were factions within the Curia, that there were suggestions, that there were people who were implacably opposed to what Francis seemed to be doing. Has all that gone? Is all that melted away now?
Well, that's not new in the church. People feel strongly about things. There was a group of people that from the beginning were deeply suspicious of Francis. If you like, if you have a mentality where you see the church to some extent at war with the modern world or a refuge from it, you probably didn't like Francis, because he started with this joy, this basic idea that humanity, is good. And so I think people wanted, if you like, a bit more of the stern kind of teacher of previous popes. But, ultimately, the Church is concerned with evangelization. This is the big thing that it does. How does it proclaim to the world? Now, we've been talking about secularization. The truth is, secularization is complex. On the one hand, we have a very sharp decline in Europe of people who are what we might call cultural Catholics, who grew up Catholic, who inherited their identity through their family. They are drastically dropping. But we have this new people now joining the church. 10,000 became Catholic in Paris over Easter, for example. Sometimes described as the seekers and the searchers. People coming from a non-religious background who are becoming Catholic in their 20s and 30s. We're going through what Francis called a change of era. And one of the important things about this conclave is that I hope anyway, and I pray that it produces a Pope who really understands this shift and understands that what Francis was doing was essential to evangelizing this era we're now in.
But that is critical, isn't it? That's critical to the future of the church.
It's absolutely critical. I mean, we can discuss lots and lots of issues, but ultimately the church is in the business of evangelization, and the Pope is the evangelizer in chief. He has also to be a statesman. We have to imagine him dealing with world leaders. He also has to be a good governor of this place, of the Curia. He has to be lots of things. But firstly, he's an evangelizer in chief. He has to capture people's hearts. And the wonderful funeral oration of Cardinal Ray at the funeral of Francis, the first half of it was actually all about that. It was about how Francis could awaken in people's hearts, even people a long way from faith, a sense of goodness, a sense of responsibility. That is a huge achievement, and I know the cardinals will want to build on that. They don't want to lose that in this next pontificate. That's why it's fascinating to know who's in there right now, waiting to come out.
But it also explains the speed as well, surely, that at least 2/3 have come to those conclusions as well, that they understand the issues, they understand the problems, and that added to the sense of urgency might be the wrong word, but the sense of, we've got to get this thing done.
Yeah, I mean, I'd use the word decisiveness. I think and of course it's very important. My first reaction when I saw the white smoke, this stage in the day, was actually one of relief. They've been decisive. They've managed to come round the next Pope, and he will be the fruit of a fairly rapid consensus, and that's a good sign. It's always a good sign.
Some in the crowd there with their hands clasped together, awaiting the name of the new man who will lead them for the next few years at least. Aline.
Well, just to say there were 15,000 people in the square at the moment. White smoke billowed out of Sistine Chapel. The Sistine Chapel, we're now up to nearly 50,000 we hear, and you just know that all the streets around here are already now full, but that signal that the white smoke gave for people to pour into the square has been heard, and it's already filled up in every direction that we can see, but we know that beyond that, people are still pouring into the square. This is a hugely consequential moment, as we say, for all of these people here, for the Catholic Church around the world, but on the global stage.
Just looking at those pictures, all those flags from
Brazil,
everywhere, Venezuela as well, I think, Canada. Of course. Catholics united, for now, seemingly,
one of the
at this moment.
So-called Papal is a Canadian, the Archbishop of Quebec, Gérard Lacroix. They will, of course, be delighted if they have the first Canadian Pope.
An American Pope, perhaps?
We have, for the first time, the very real possibility of an American Pope, Cardinal Robert Prevost, who has in fact spent much of his life in Peru and Rome, but indeed Chicago-born. To have a Pope speaking America to American, speaking with an American accent, with a Chicago accent, to America at this time, you know, could be fascinating.
There was also always a sense, wasn't there, that perhaps because of America's outsized position in the world, economically, militarily, and so on, that it didn't necessarily, the church didn't necessarily need a voice to come from that part of the world.
Well, I think it worked the other way. I think the assumption was you couldn't have a Pope of a superpower.
Right.
Because to some extent the Pope always, as it were, challenges a superpower. However, I think that logic has changed now because of what's been happening in America. And many of the cardinals kept saying to us in the last couple of weeks, nationality in this conclave doesn't matter. If it's the right man, then he could be from anywhere.
It's about reaching out. It's about evangelizing, as you were saying. It's about trying to bring more into the fold.
Or rather, to start with the proclamation that Francis always started it, which was that God loves you and that you have a dignity. That's the first message. The rest, in a sense, you know, follows on from that.
Ali?
Well, it's a lot to do with the personality of the man we'll see emerge from the balcony. Some have been seen much more as politicians. Some have been seen as theologians. Some as preachers and evangelists. All of that will be revealed shortly when we get the name of the cardinal who's won and the name they'll take as Pope.
And as we see the American flag there in the crowd, South Africa next to it. Really quite extraordinary scenes. We are high up in our broadcasting position here above St. Peter's Square, but we can feel the electricity of this moment, the atmosphere, the joy, pure joy of these pilgrims, I suppose, greeting the news of a new Pope. Hello to you. Welcome to the Vatican and St. Peter's Square here in the heart of Rome, where a new era is about to begin for the Roman Catholic Church. In the last hour, a successor to Pope Francis has been elected. White smoke was seen rising from a chimney high above the Sistine Chapel, much to the delight of the tens of thousands of people who'd gathered here, and indeed many millions around the world, watching this moment in history. Well, the 133 cardinal electors had finally found one among them to lead the Catholic Church, and we are still waiting to hear who that person actually is. Very shortly, we hope, he will be walking out onto the main balcony here above St. Peter's Square, just over my shoulder, to greet the crowds and to proclaim his papal name and to move forward with the church. Our religion editor, Ali Maqbool, is here with me. We didn't expect this to be so quick, did we?
No, and the drama of the moment really can't be understated. A serene, sunny, early evening in Rome just turned at the moment those first bits of white smoke started to emerge from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel. A buzz went through the crowd. It was a signal that a person had been chosen among the 133 inside the Sistine Chapel, that they'd come to a two-thirds majority. The bells of St. Peter's started to peal, which was the signal for anyone close to here to pour into the square to ultimately see the revelation of who had been chosen. We'll hear the papal name they will take. We'll hear about the direction that this church of 1.4 billion might take in the coming years, and of course who that new global voice will be. It has been an extraordinary 45 minutes or so since we saw the smoke emerge. We had bands process into the square, and as I say, tens of thousands now filling every street leading out of here.
But interesting as well for those people who are not sure of the choreography of all this, that we get the news that a pope has been chosen, but we don't know their name.
No, they have time to prepare. They're asked If they want to take up the role, they go into what's called the room of tears to get ready. They pray, they meditate if they want before that, but they get ready, and then we still won't see them immediately. We'll hear the protodeacon who will come out, first tell us the name of the cardinal who's been chosen, the name they choose to take as Pope. They originally would take their own names, but then we had a Pope cardinal who was named Peter, and he thought it might be a bit of an insult to be called Pope Peter again after the person considered by Catholics to be the first Pope, the Apostle of Jesus, Peter, after whom the basilica behind us is named, the square is named. And so that tradition of taking a different name of someone they admired, perhaps, as someone they wanted to emulate was taken. So we will hear that, and it will be after that that we'll hear, we'll see the curtains part again, and we'll see the new Pope emerge.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because lots of talk when the conclave began as to whether there were those who perhaps felt that perhaps Pope Francis had gone too far in their idea of what a liberal church should look like, that perhaps we might get a retrenchment, a move back. That belief, that fear, it doesn't feel as if those factions were there, because this decision came pretty quickly to find a two-thirds majority.
It's difficult to say until we see the person who emerges on that balcony, what was going on inside. But just to say that the conversations about who the Pope should be or what is needed by the Church and the world don't start when Conclave starts. They were going on in this city, yes, informal meetings, but in coffees and dinners outside, as soon as we heard of the death of Pope Francis, and cardinals started to descend on Rome. And it was interesting to sample some of the thinking over that time, and even during those couple of weeks, there was a mood change. Even some of those who had been critical about what they saw as the radical nature at some points of the Pope Francis papacy still saw the way the crowd, for example, during the funeral responded to talk of the causes that Pope Francis had championed. They got to reflect on the impact that Pope Francis has had on the world, on the way the Church reached out, on being a voice for the voiceless. And there was some sense that actually there was an appreciation of that over the last couple of weeks, even from some of those who had criticised him. So the talk started to be of continuity, but perhaps with a way that brought everybody along, because there was a criticism of Pope Francis that he would go ahead and not necessarily spend too much effort in combating those who were opposed to his moves. So that was what the talk was, and perhaps that figure did emerge.
All right. Aleem, thank you for that. Aleem Maqbool, our religion editor there. You're watching BBC News.
You're watching BBC News. I'm Marianne Mashiri here at the Vatican, and we continue our live coverage of the announcement and election of a new Pope. You can see there the close-up shot of that famous St. Peter's Basilica balcony, the red velvet curtain draped across it. And it is here that in moments we will be hearing those famous words, Habemus Papam. Those words, which will be spoken in Latin, will herald the beginning of what many believe could be a new era for the Catholic Church. Those words will be read by the proto-deacon of the College of Cardinals, the French prelate Dominique Mamberti. He will walk out onto the balcony and he will read in Latin, Annuntio vobis gaudium magnum, Habemus Papam. I announce to you a great joy, we have a Pope. He will then name the new pontiff. First of all, the first and middle name of the chosen cardinal in Latin, and then the last name of the chosen cardinal in Latin, and then finally the new name of the chosen cardinal. This is the moment that the crowds are waiting for, and in times gone by, in the last conclave, we waited, I think, about 66 minutes for the announcement of Jorge Bergoglio, Pope Francis. It's now been exactly 60 minutes since the smoke started to issue out of that famous chimney atop the Sistine Chapel. You can hear the helicopters flying overhead. The crowd continue to pour into St. Peter's Basilica. It is so crowded now. And let's take this opportunity to bring in Madeleine Tehan, a former associate editor of the Catholic Herald. Madeleine, thank you for joining us. And if I can ask you, first of all, how are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling absolutely amazed. I'm quite astonished at how quickly we've seen the white smoke. I think everyone was expecting a much longer conclave based on the fact that the cardinals didn't know each other as well as they have in the past, because obviously Francis created a great number of cardinals. But we're all taken by surprise, and I'm very excited. I'm rather nervous. I imagine I'm feeling like a lot of Catholics out there at the moment across the world.
So where are the nerves coming from, Madeleine?
Well, he's the successor to St. Peter, the 267th Pope. I suppose the nerves are that we are at a time, I think, the Church is very much at a crossroads, I feel. I feel like Pope Francis's papacy was so unique, and in some ways it was quite divisive. So I suppose the nerves are about, what sort of Pope are we going to have? Are we going to have someone who will continue Francis's legacy with that sort of emphasis on a pastoral sort of approach to things, with perhaps less attention to doctrinal detail? Or in fact, are we going to have a Pope who wants to sort of make things clearer again? It's going to be very interesting. So I suppose that's why I perhaps feel a little bit nervous, is which way are we going to go? Because I really did feel that at this conclave there was a real battle for the soul of the Catholic Church.
And what do you think the length of this conclave tells us about that decision? It hasn't taken the cardinals long. They decided after just 4 votes, 2 days, same timing as Pope Benedict XVI. What does that tell us, do you think, about the way in which this important decision was made?
Well, I think obviously we have to trust that obviously the cardinals have discerned and they've taken it seriously, and obviously we've had the general congregations going on since Pope Francis died, so it's not like the conversations just started in the past 2 days. But I suppose most people will be thinking, okay, it's been quite a short conclave, perhaps it is a cardinal who is very well known, very well established globally and within the Vatican. I mean, there has been a sense that I've picked up that in fact they want someone who is perhaps an Italian, because they want someone who is familiar, because there's that real feeling that the Church as an organisation needs to be well-oiled again, it needs to be properly run, it needs someone who knows how to handle that Vatican bureaucracy. So such a short conclave, to me personally, I mean, I'll probably be proven wrong, would suggest it's somebody who is very well known, and perhaps very au fait with how the Vatican works, and well known both in Rome and across the world.
The legacy of Pope Francis looms large, does it not, over this next papacy? And as you mentioned there are different avenues, different roads that this Pope could take the Roman Catholic Church right now. And there are also challenges as well, to be frank.
Yes, there are huge challenges. And I think that the thing about Francis's legacy...
Let me just interrupt you there. Madeleine, let me interrupt you there.